Management for Mortals. Really excited to be here with you all. Welcome, my friends. Here we are, 4,000 weeks, Time Management for Mortals. Excited to be with you all here as we are getting into chapter 1 of our book study. And in this book, what we're reading today is 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. I guess I took my my cover off so you can't quite see it. But this is part of our book study here, so we'll give a few moments to let people arrive, wander in. Today we're talking about the limit embracing life. And this paradox of limitations that so much of our lives is consumed in trying to avoid our limitations. We think that everything can be fixed. We think that every nuisance, every frustration, every difficulty, everything we can get over, we can get out of. But there's certain things in life that are just part of the human condition. And as Oliver Burkeman talks about in this book, one of our biggest problems with time, with the belief that we don't have enough time and space to get through everything, with the belief that we will never have enough time, is that we've inherited in our culture a set of ideas about time that doesn't actually really fit our human condition. And our freedom, we try to become free from our limits, and that's what's such a big emphasis in our society, is becoming free from our limits. But as Burkeman shows us, that's always going to increase our exacerbation, because no matter how much we get to push our limits, we're always going to come up to the edge at some point. So the key to this book, but really the key to this chapter 1, is understanding that when we can rather take life on its own terms, rather than us imposing what we want from life, we can actually live much more fully. When we can take the fact that I am a limited human being and there's just no escaping that, I'm always going to run up into my limits, then I can actually be fully myself. Then I don't have to constantly be wrestling with just the way that reality is. And so this first chapter introduces part 1, which is about choosing to choose. Because another core theme in this chapter is that it's inevitable that we have to make hard choices, that we have to make hard calls. And this is something that especially stuck out to me as I was reading this chapter, because especially as I'm here on social media, I have a private practice that I'm growing, I do consultations, I'm putting together groups. It's so easy to want to maximize everything, even here with content. It's so easy to want to pull out as much value as we can. But if we think we can get it all done, then we can believe that there's some system that we can put in place that we won't have to make hard calls. And that's what's unavoidable. Because when we believe that there's some system that we can put in place in our life that frees us from having to make hard calls, then we postpone the most important things to later on. And so choosing to choose this part 1 of Time Management for Mortals, and this first chapter, The Limit Embracing Life, is a recognition that not choosing is a choice. Not taking a risk is a risk. Not doing something is doing something. We can't escape by avoiding, because avoiding is actually a choice to just face different issues. And so choosing to choose is about recognizing that our task, when we allow ourselves to shift the task from trying to be unlimited to embracing our limits, then the question is more about, well, then what am I going to do? Considering that I'm limited, considering that I can't do everything, considering that I can't have 2 careers at the same time, I can't both be a doctor and a lawyer. What am I going to choose? And this is where feeling what it feels like to be human, that discomfort, He talks about a psychotherapist, Bruce Tift, who talks about the claustrophobia of being a human, of having to make a choice. But also, making these choices is actually what leads to fulfillment. One of the other things that's a very interesting thing that stuck out to me about this chapter is he points out that we see time as a resource, as something that can be used, as something that we have to do something with, as we see it as a resource like water or money. But time isn't actually a resource. That's our modern way of thinking about time, and it's our very modern way of thinking about time that gets us in the trouble in the first place. Rather, it's much more appropriate to think of time as a wave that's happening that we get to ride on. And so there's certainly helpful things about thinking about managing our time, but this abstract concept of time is actually something that's completely new. So I wanted to look here on this section on page 18 of time before timetables. And one of the things he says here on page 19 is that our modern way of thinking about time is so deeply entrenched that we even forget that it is a way of thinking about time. We're like the proverbial fish who have no idea what water is because it surrounds us completely. And this way of thinking about time, he talks about how he talks about the peasants in medieval times, they had before the Industrial Revolution, they had all types of problems. Peasants and people in general before the Industrial Revolution, they had all types of problems. But one problem they didn't have was managing time, because they didn't think about time as an abstract idea. There were no clocks. And he talks about here on page 20, the medieval farmer simply had no reason to adopt such a bizarre idea in the first place. Workers got up and slept at dusk, the lengths of their days varying with the seasons. There was no need to think of time as something abstract and separate from life. You milked the cows when they needed milking and harvested the crops when it was harvest time, and anybody who tried to impose an external schedule on any of that, for example, by doing a month of milking in a single day to get it out of the way, or by trying to make the harvest come sooner, would have been rightly considered a lunatic. There was no anxious pressure to get everything done either, because a farmer's work is always infinite. There will always be another milking, another harvest, forever. So there's no sense of trying to race towards some hypothetical end. The historians call this way of living task orientation. And he contrasts it with how we live today, which is thinking of life as a kind of conveyor belt, a moving conveyor belt that's always shifting, always coming and going. With each hour or each week or each year is like a container being carried on that belt. And we must fill it up as it passes. And if we want to feel like we're getting a good use of our time, we have to fill it up well. When there's too many activities to fit comfortably in these containers of time passing us by, we feel unpleasantly busy. And when there's too few, we get bored. If we keep the pace of the containers, then we congratulate ourselves for staying on top of things and feeling like we're justifying our existence. So much of our ideas about time come from this fact that we see it as a resource, and yet it's not. It's just the world unfolding before us. And when we adopt this sense of seeing everything in terms of how much we can pull out of time or how we can make the most of our time, we get drawn away from a sense of connection with the universe, connection with the seasons. We get pulled away from that task orientation. Task orientation is just the sense of working when things need to be worked, waking up in the morning, going to bed at night. How rare is that for us now? In fact, as a therapist, the biggest piece of advice I have for people who say, what should I do to improve my mental health? It's go to bed at the same time each night and wake up at the same time each morning. Your body is a routine system. And when you go to bed at one time, go to bed at another time, you're just constantly throwing yourself out of whack. It's something that we've really missed, is this sense of seasonality. And so Gary Herbal says, we slip into a realm where when we're in these places where we're working with the seasons and we're present not to what's coming or how to use our time best, but just present to what's in front of us, we slip into a realm where there's enough of everything, where we're not trying to fill a void in ourselves or in the world. The boundary that separates us, the self, from the rest of reality becomes blurry and time stands still. The clock doesn't stop ticking, of course, Herbal writes, but we don't hear it ticking. And so if you're sitting with this right now, I want you to imagine a time when you've experienced that. When you were just there. When there wasn't a place where you had to get to, there wasn't a place that you had to be. It was like you and your sense of self actually just kind of vanished because you were so enamored, so fully present to what's right here. This is the loss of self when we're filled, when we're present, when we're not so focused on getting things done or doing or accomplishing, and rather we are here in the moment. These are really the things that we live for. And they can happen spontaneously. I want to invite you to think of that. It might be the time when a child was born, maybe a wedding day. I remember when I was in high school, there was a moment when I was a high jumper and I got to a very high bar. It was 6'6", and I was so ecstatic. And it was just like everything paused and I was able to just be there, fully immersed in the moment. This is also something that we can actually cultivate. So when we practice mindfulness meditation, we are learning to let go of our need to get somewhere and recognizing, as Jon Kabat-Zinn says, that wherever you go, there you are. That there's no there to get to because we're already here. And we're always going to be here. We're always going to be in the now. And so whenever we shift to wanting to get there, it pulls us out of the now, pulls us out of ourself, and just leads to this frustration. And so what Berkman highlights here is that this pre-industrial revolution way of thinking of time, they didn't have the same problems that we had with time because they just didn't operate with this sense that time was this abstract thing outside of us. And even to prove this point, we can kind of do an experiment here. I want you to just imagine what you're doing tomorrow. Imagine your day tomorrow. And just see, so what shows up? For me, when I think of that, it becomes this abstract time, right? I think of my Google Calendar. I can literally see like noon, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's what comes up for me. Because it's this abstract entity. Making time standardized and visible in this fashion inevitably encourages people to think of it as this abstract thing with an independent existence, distinct from the specific activities that we might spend it on. Time is what ticks away as the hands move across the clock face. This is one of the things I think that's so beautiful too about going on a walk. I love going on a walk. It's these simple things because when I go on a walk, I'm not really worried about where I'm getting to. I'm just walking. I'm just present, talking with my wife, seeing my kids move. And this is something that I think we need to develop and foster and cultivate in our days. We need to put times and places in our days that aren't about getting somewhere, that are about this task orientation. From thinking about time in its abstract, it's natural to treat it as a resource, something to be bought, right? I sell my time for work, something to be sold and used as efficiently as possible, just like coal, iron, or any other raw material. And this is where we fall into an even bigger trap because we start projecting our lives into this envisioned future. And then we tie our whole sense of self-work on how we're using time. So time stops to be this wave that we're riding and starts to become this litmus test of how good I am as a human being. Once time and life had been separated in most people's minds, time became a thing that you used. And it's this shift that serves as the precondition for all of the uniquely modern ways in which we struggle with time today. Once time is a resource to be used, you start feeling the pressure, whether from external resources or from yourself, to use it well and to berate yourself when you feel you've wasted it. When you're faced with too many demands, it's easy to assume that the only answer must be to make better use of your time by becoming more efficient, driving yourself harder, or working for longer, as if you were a machine in the Industrial Revolution, instead of asking the question of whether these demands might be unreasonable. I remember this so clearly. My wife and I were talking once, and there was a difficult time, and I just said, okay, well, I'll just do this. And she said, John Paul, working harder, working more can't be the solution for every problem in our lives. And she kind of said to me, John Paul, I know you're working hard, but I want you to be here with me. I want you to be here with the kids. And it was really a wake-up call because I realized that I had this assumption in my mind. I think it's an immense assumption that's touted all over the wellness world, all over the professional world, certainly on social media, that when there's a problem, the solution is to work harder and work more. And indeed, we do need to learn how to double down and work through hard things, and there's difficult seasons. But one of the things that I learned when I was in my master's program for becoming a counselor was in my family systems class, was that in family systems, when there's a problem, rather than the family system stepping back and exploring why the solution isn't working, usually family systems just double down on the solution, and usually the solution's part of the problem. So for example, when a teenager starts asking for more autonomy, oftentimes the family can actually say, no, we're gonna ground you even more because you're pushing limits, when actually the issue is that those limits aren't appropriate for that teenager's developmental level. And so it was one of these wake-up moments for me of realizing, oh yeah, working harder can't always be the solution. And that's one of the great themes of this book. He says the fundamental problem is that this attitude towards time sets up a rigged game in which it's impossible to ever feel as if you're doing well enough. And it becomes difficult, instead of living our lives as they unfold in time, instead of just being time, it becomes difficult not to value each moment according to its usefulness for some future goal or for some future oasis of relaxation that you hope to reach once your tasks are finally out of the way. And this is so deeply embedded in our culture. This is the whole retirement system that we tell people to work all your life so that, and so many people that I work with, I've worked with many people who have become retired and then come into therapy because they said essentially, my whole life I was living for retirement. I was working really hard so I could retire and take a break. And now that I'm retired, I don't know what to do with myself. Because we've lost touch with a sense of rhythm and transition. When we prioritize future benefits over current enjoyments as an absolute, it backfires. It wrenches us out of the present moment, and it leaves us to a life spent leaning into the future, worrying about whether things will work out, and experiencing everything in terms of some later hoped-for benefit, so that peace never quite arrives. We live in a culture that lives for the weekends, lives for the holidays, lives for retirement, lives for some time that it all opens up and things calm down. And that way of living constantly leaves us not here. As he says in Confessions of a Productivity Geek, He talks about believing that he had this sense that if he could only work hard enough, if he could only find the right productivity system, if he could only find the right time management system, then everything would fit in place. He says he was always believing that he was just right on the edge. And I relate to this so much, that this sense that, okay, I just have to get a system in place. And I think there's something to be said to that, but it can't be the whole answer. And also, where we are right now matters. The journey is as important as the destination. And as Richard Rohr says, how you get there is where you'll arrive. So if you get there by constantly leaning into the future, you will arrive at a point where you're just leaning into the future, never quite being able to relax. And he said he was sitting there after kind of working through all this productivity stuff, and he just realized it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. When we believe that we can find some system, some place, sometime when everything opens up and will make space for everything, what we're really doing is avoiding the fact that we're limited. He said it held at bay certain scary questions about what I was doing with my life, whether major changes might not be needed. If I could get enough work done, my subconscious had concluded, I wouldn't need to ask if it was healthy to take so much of my self-worth from work in the first place. And as long as I was just on the cusp of mastering my time, I could avoid the thought that what really life was about might actually involve me surrendering the craving for mastery and diving into the unknown instead. Our task, as Erich Fromm says, isn't to feel secure, but rather to tolerate insecurity. Because everything in life that's worth doing involves risk, involves sacrifice. There is no life in which we optimize ourselves, we perfect ourselves into the type of people that don't have to make hard calls and sacrifice good things. I experience this so often. This is maybe a funny thing, but I experience this when I go out to eat. I can be like, oh, I really want this and I really want this, and I can try to figure out some way. The reality is like, hey, you can only eat one meal. We are limited. And because we live in this culture of optimization, there's this sly lie that's crept into our whole entire lives that says there's some way that you can do it all. And when you try to do it all, you end up doing nothing important. The only way you can do something of importance in your life is to let go of the desire to do it all and choose this one thing. And that's actually part of what makes it important. It's the thing that you chose. And the existentialist Viktor Frankl says this, that our life meaning doesn't come from some overall meaning. It comes from choosing meaning in this moment, choosing what's meaningful in this moment. It's something that we make, something that we connect with. We don't want to feel the anxiety that might arise if we asked ourselves whether we're on the right path or whether there's ideas about ourselves we need to give up. We don't want to risk getting hurt in relationships or failing professionally. We don't want to risk that we might never succeed in pleasing our parents or changing certain things that we don't like about ourselves. The details differ from person to person, but the kernel is the same. We recoil from the notion that this is life with all its flaws and its inescapable vulnerabilities, with its extreme brevity and our limited influence over how it unfolds. It's the only one we get. This is life, my friends, right? Not next year, not after you graduate, not after you have kids, not after you get into a relationship or out of a relationship or get a new job. This is life. Right here and right now. And one of the greatest things that contributes to our unhappiness is the belief that we should postpone living now until something comes about so that we have more space and time. This is the time that we get, and we don't get it back. And that means we have to confront the fact that we're going to die. That in 3 generations, no one will know our name. That one day we'll be part of the earth out there. Just like a snowflake, I've been reflecting on this as the snow's fallen, that I'm just like a snowflake coming down. And when I say, oh no, one day I'm gonna melt, I actually miss the journey of descent. I miss seeing the other snowflakes falling around me. I miss the beautiful perspective from so high up, so early on. I miss the exhilaration of the wind. I miss the ups and the downs and the sorrows and the relationships that we connect with to get through them. You and I, we're just like snowflakes. We're falling, gliding, drifting. And one day we'll melt. One day the spring will come. And we will melt like water will be absorbed into the earth. And guess what? That will make a nutrient-rich place, and the whole cycle will again occur. It's okay to be limited. That's the whole point here in the limit-embracing life, is that the more we try to avoid and push away and escape our limits, the more frustrated, overwhelmed, and anxious we become. He quotes Nietzsche here as saying, "We labor at our daily work more ardently and thoughtlessly than is necessary to sustain our life, because it is even more necessary to not have leisure to stop and think. Haste is universal because everyone is in flight from themselves." Almost everything worth doing means embracing our limitations and stepping into the unknown, where we don't know what's going to happen. We can believe that there's some way that we can avoid feeling the fear by perfecting us in some way. But the fact is, fear is just part of the deal. Denying reality never really works on page 31. It might provide some immediate relief because it allows us to go on thinking that at some point in the future you might at last feel totally in control. But it can't ever bring the sense that you're doing enough or that you are enough, because this way of thinking defines enough as some kind of limitless control that no human can attain. And it just leads us to more overwhelm. The more we believe that we could get on top of everything, the more likely we are to say yes to things that don't matter so much. And this just feels so true in my life. We can do all the unimportant things and push the important things off until we have time and space to do them well. The important things are worth doing poorly. I think it was maybe Winston Churchill who said, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing imperfectly. The paradox of limitations is that the more you try to manage your time with the goal of achieving a feeling of total control and freedom from the inevitable constraints of being a human being, the more stressful, empty, and frustrating life gets. But the more you confront the facts of finitude instead and work with them rather than against them, the more productive, meaningful, and joyful life becomes. You won't have time to do everything you want. You can't do it all. And so we must choose to choose. We must choose rather than saying, I'm not going to do this thing, I'm going to try to do this. We have to make the hard choices. Since hard choices are unavailable, he says on page 32, what matters is learning to make them consciously, learning to make the hard choices consciously, deciding what to focus on and what to neglect, rather than letting them get made by default, or deceiving yourself that with enough hard work and the right time management tricks, you might not have to make hard calls at all. It means staying firm even when you're feeling that fear of missing out. Because missing out is a guarantee. It's just part of being human. It's not something that's wrong. It's just part of being a human. He says every decision to use a portion of time on anything represents the sacrifice of all the other ways in which you could have spent that time but didn't. And to willingly make that sacrifice, to choose this thing at the exclusion of all else, is to take a stand on what matters to you. What matters to me is living well, living fully. What matters to me is being available to my children emotionally. So that means going to bed early. What matters to me is being available to my clients emotionally. And that means waking up early, taking care of myself. What matters to me is my connection with my wife. And that means that we don't put phones in the bedroom. What matters to me is having a time and place in my life that isn't about pulling things out. And that's why before bed, my wife and I, we get into bed at 8 p.m. and we listen to a book, one of the classics. Because what matters to me is that at the end of this life, it's not all about how much I got out. It's about what I became, how I left a legacy of love for my children. It's about how much love I've brought into the world. And so I want to invite you to think of it, and you can write a comment here. What matters to you? What are your guiding stars? What are your values? Because our values are what can guide us in making the hard sacrificial choices. To not make decisions based on what's this going to give me, but to make choices based on who's this going to help me to become. Somebody who lives by my values. To let go of the instrumentalism that says, well, I only evaluate things based on what I can get out of them. Pardon me. To let go of the instrumentalism that says, I only evaluate things based on what I can get out of them. And rather that says, oh, I make my decisions based on my values. And I love this. This is one of my favorite lines here in the whole book. Perhaps most radically of all, seeing and accepting our limited powers over time can prompt us to question the very idea that time is something that you use in the first place. There's an alternative. The unfashionable but powerful notion of letting time use you. Approaching life not as an opportunity to implement your predetermined plans for success, but as a matter of responding to the needs of your place in your moment in history. None of us can single-handedly overthrow a society dedicated to limitless productivity distraction, and speed. But right here, right now, you can stop buying into the delusion that any of that distraction, productivity, speed, maximization, limitless power, you can stop buying into the delusion that any of that is going to bring you satisfaction. You can face the facts. You can brace yourself for the icy water, and you can step in. We can't do it all. You can't do it all. You're not going to get everything that you want in life, and that's okay. Because once we can accept that fact, the bare fact of our human limitations, the bare fact of I'm me, I exist inside limitation, then we can be fully here. And here, right now, not tomorrow, not next year, not next week, here, right now, this is where life is happening. And it's always here, right in front of us. So I really want to ask and invite you to ask yourself this question. You can't comment here. What are you waiting for? What are some of the things, and this isn't an abstract question, it's a specific question. Ask yourself, what are some of the things that you're saying after this, I'll be able to start living more fully? Or after this gets completed, or after I attain this? What are some of the things in the future that are stopping you from putting your toes into the sand of wherever life is right now? We can let go of this idea that time is something that we need to use and base our self-worth on. And we can rather just embrace the sense that time is something that's just happening to us. We're just thrown into reality. And it's something that we get to surf, something that we get to play, something that we get to work with. So I'd love to hear thoughts, questions, reflections from the book, from the chapter. If you've been reading along or if you've just been tuning in here to the live, I want to take some time here to respond. So next week we will read the efficiency chap on chapter 2. If you want to join the book study, comment book study. Next week we'll read the efficiency chap. Next week we'll read the efficiency trap, chapter 2, pages 37 to 56. But I would love to hear from you what some of your favorite quotes were, or what some of your favorite parts of the chapter were. Procrastination, Lewis says, it was shocking for me to see that procrastination, the other end of productivity spectrum, is also a problem with time control. Yeah, that procrastination is the desire to not feel our limitations, because procrastination protects us from taking the risk in failing. And so what procrastination is really about is it's about protecting us from living fully, because living fully always means disappointments, difficulties, challenges. And there's a fear of aging. Yeah, I think our fear of aging comes because our culture struggles to confront death. You can see this in the wellness world. Guys, the wellness world is not so much on helping you live well. I think often let me say that, but the wellness world is so obsessed with living forever. It's this secret obsession of maximizing everything. It's not about how do I live the good life. It's about how do I live the longest and the best. And it's just so outside of our control. Confronting death is, if we want to live a healthy life, it's on the other side of confronting our death, not maximizing everything. Fear, yeah, a lot of fear. What are we afraid of? What's the title? Susan, you can, if you comment book club, I'll send it to you. It's called 4,000 Weeks Time Management for Mortals. There we go, yeah. So what other thoughts, questions, reflections might you all have here? There might not be any. I'd love to hear them if you do. We'll be tuning in more next week. We'll be doing chapter 2. Would love for y'all to join me. I'm curious what's stuck out either today during this chapter, or maybe just in general throughout the book. Wonderful, yeah. Well, thank you all for being here. Let's see if we have any other questions. I don't think so. You guys can tune in next week, 12:15, and we'll continue exploring, learning to embrace our limitations. It really is it's changed my life. It really has. It's not something I can say enough. So, also, if you are interested, I just put a video too from the conversation. I had a conversation with Oliver Berkman. We had a conversation here, and it's on my page. So if you go to one of my most recent clips, you can get the link to the podcast there, and yeah, we'll continue walking together. I want you to give yourself permission today. I just really want to invite you to give yourself permission today, just to be limited, to not do everything perfectly. Of course, we want to strive to do things well. We want to strive for excellence, but not perfection, because it's just not something we can ever attain. Connect with your values and live from those. That's enough. That's a life worth lived. So, thank you all for being here. I'll see you next week. Peace.